I encourage you, if you haven't read his book, get a copy of it and read it. One of the truly great teachers in the church said, Islam does not bring peace. It never has, it never will. This is the result of its very nature. No Muslim can point to even one example of history where Islam ever brought peace. There is no peace even among Muslims themselves anywhere in the world today. And you see the different groups of Muslims today, the Shiites and the Sunnis especially, going at each other and killing each other off. And often in Iraq, we've seen where a Sunni Muslim has bombed a mosque filled with Shiites and so forth and so on, and they're killing each other, and that's what he's talking about. Prime Minister William Gladstone, elected 4 times Prime Minister of Great Britain, from 1868 and then in 1894. Gladstone, in a Parliament session, said these words, and by the way, if he said them today, he'd be arrested for committing a hate crime, because this would be illegal today in Great Britain. But he stood in Parliament and he said, so long as there is this book, and he held up the Quran, he says, there will be no peace in the world. Isn't that amazing? Prime Minister Stephen Harper recently said in Canada that Canada is safer now than it was on September 11th, 2001, when Al-Qaeda attacked the United States, but that the major threat is still Islamicism. And he was excoriated for saying these things. He went on to say, there are other threats out there, but that is the one, and I can tell you, that occupies the security apparatus most regularly in terms of actual terrorist threats. And the government officials come out and they make statements like this, but they still aren't telling us everything that's going on. I think they feel that the whole public would be, just threatened so badly that the fright and the panic would be amazing. The word jihad, and this is important that you understand this, has 2 meanings. The one meaning that the moderate Muslims go by is that it's a struggle. Jihad is a struggle to learn the teachings and the precepts of Islam or Muhammad. But the jihad today that the militant Muslims want to promote, Islamicism, as Harper called it, is war. Declaring a holy war on the enemies of Islam and Allah. The first jihad took place within 100 years after Muhammad died, because the Muslims spread Islam all over the Middle East, all the way into Spain, and then tried to cross over and bring Islam into Europe. And they were stopped in France by Charles Martel at the Battle of Tours in the year 732, exactly 100 years after Muhammad died. So that was the first attempt to spread Islam by force over Europe. The second jihad came shortly after, and it continued on, and it raged until the year 1683, when the Ottoman Turks, that is those Turks that are in Turkey today, they were stopped at the gates of Vienna. That's how close it came to taking over Europe. And you know today, just in your general knowledge, that a great portion, especially of Eastern Europe, is Muslim. You have Muslim countries around Russia and that whole eastern area. And that was from this jihad, where these people were captured and converted, submit or die, and they did. Now, at the time of Martin Luther, this jihad was still going on. And they were coming, trying to get into Europe, and there were battles and there were wars, and the armies of Europe went out against these Islamic invaders. And it's interesting, Luther wrote a hymn that is very well known in the Lutheran circles. It's called, Lord, Keep Us Steadfast in Thy Word. And at the bottom you see the words that we sing today, because they've been sanitized. Keep us steadfast in thy word, curb those who fain by craft or sword would wrest the kingdom from thy Son and set at naught all he has done. But originally Luther wrote this, Lord, keep us steadfast in thy word and curb the Turks and the papist sword, who Jesus Christ, your only Son, would tumble from the throne. Quite interesting how we dress things up, and they did it way back then too. Today we are in the midst of the third jihad, and that's what's going on in your lifetime and mine. That's what our children and our grandchildren are going to witness. That's the very scene that the Bible talks about that will happen prior to the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. And that's why I emphasize this DVD on Iran, and again encourage you to get a copy if you would. In the mosques and in the madrasas are the schools all around the world, a radical version of Islam is being taught. Even in moderate Muslim communities, radical Islam is being taught in the mosque. The best estimates that are being made today is that of all the Muslims in the world, approximately out of 1,300,000,000 Muslims, 7% are considered radical. That's an awful lot of radical Muslims. Many of them control whole countries. Some of them are in the majority of countries. Some of them are minority. And in the United States, they're a very small minority. But what one person can do, as we know, is quite frightening. Islamic terrorism has Israel and the United States and all of Europe in its sights. And it means to claim us in whatever way it takes. And you can see that they are even teaching their children at the earliest age to become terrorists. Robert Mueller, FBI director, said it's only a matter of time and economics before terrorists will be able to purchase nuclear weapons, and the world's law enforcement community must unite to try to prevent it. We have seen and recall the bombings in 1983 at the Marine Barracks in Beirut, 1993, the attack on the World Trade Center, the bombings at the embassies in Nairobi and Tanzania, 2000 attack on the USS Cole in Yemen, of course the attack on the World Trade Center, attacks gone on as in Fort Hood, and dozens and dozens and dozens of attacks in Europe and in the United States ever since. This man you see pictured here went on television. I saw the blurb, it was on CNN, and he described how you could kill over 300,000 Americans in an hour smuggling 4 pounds of anthrax through the tunnels coming out of Mexico. That ought to have a little bearing on our thoughts when we think about the border and security and so forth, and our government officials know this. According to a January 2010 report, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee said that the FBI has revealed that there are 36 Americans training with the Al-Qaeda in Yemen today. They were converted in the United States prison system. And radical prisons are a factory in which we keep rolling out new Al-Qaeda recruits in this country. According to a speech that Obama made in Egypt after he took office, he said Islam has helped to shape America. And of course, if you look at this picture, here's one place where they helped to shape America. Official policy within the Obama administration today frowns on the use of such terms as war on terror. They are called man-caused disasters. Just this year, the White House put out guidelines for the 9/11 observances, the 10th anniversary, and they said we are going to minimize references to Al-Qaeda. Don't want to offend anyone. Dateline, October 21st, like 2 weeks ago. Deputy United States Attorney General James Koh announced that the Justice Department has eliminated all references to Islam from training materials used in law enforcement. So, if we say it doesn't exist, then it doesn't exist. And we're training the law officials now to deal with radical Islam, but we can't call it radical Islam. Secretary Janet Napolitano said, we are no longer conducting a war on terrorism, it's an overseas contingency operation. I like that one. And Senator Joseph Lieberman said the administration still refuses to call our enemies in this war by its proper name, violent Islamist extremism. A reluctance, therefore, to identify our enemy as violent Islamist extremism makes it harder, I think, to mobilize effectively to fight this war of ideas. And I'm grateful that he made that statement. President Obama has said that America is not a Christian nation. And there's kind of an even-handedness again that is promoting all of this in our country, in both church and state. Of the 19 terrorists that were engaged in September 11, 2001, 15 were from Saudi Arabia, our dear and wonderful friend and ally. Today there are 35 known terrorist training camps in the United States, and they're pinpointed in red. These are where the training camps are. They're all run legally, and the government knows about each one. I'm sure they're keeping their eye on them, but many of those who go to these training camps come out of prison. They are converted from Christianity to Islam in prison. In December 2008, this Shiwa Ahmed became the first American suicide bomber. He was one of 20 or 30 Somalis who left Minneapolis, Minnesota, and trained with Al-Qaeda. And do you know, I heard on the news last night they arrested someone else for a suicide bomb that went over from Minneapolis. And they think that they happened in these Siddiqui Mosque, the Dawa Center in St. Paul. This is where the training took place for them. I have a whole series, and I took it out because I can't cover it all tonight, but I had a whole series of what was going on in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Unbelievable, the terrorists that are there. But I want to talk about Columbus, Ohio for just a moment. You may remember this pretty little Muslim girl, Rifka Berry. She converted at age 17. She became a Christian from being a Muslim family in Columbus, Ohio. She went down to Florida. They brought her back and all kinds of things. But today she's on her own. She's 18. She's still living with this Christian family. But everything that was against her came from this mosque, this cultural center in Ohio. Here you can see on the left or on the right, Private William Long, who was killed in Little Rock, Arkansas by Corey Bledsoe from Columbus, Ohio. Bledsoe trained in Yemen, lived in Columbus, where he attended one of the mosques there. I'm not going to dwell on this, but I want you to look at these men, the first three there on the left, from Toledo, Ohio, in prison today for attempting to kill American soldiers. The one in the center at